Hi, this is part 2 of the NuTone Model 2057-2058 rebuild. It's been about a week and a half or so since I shot the first part to get you up to speed. All of the components were ordered to rebuild the master station. I have also ordered replacement tubes which came in. I have all of the original tubes which we tested in the last video stored away in their little carrying case so they're nice and safe. We put the cloth on top so they don't rattle around. We won't open up the box with the new tubes until it's time to use them. I ordered in some components for it that I needed, and what we're going to do today is we're going to disassemble the master station so we can get to the chassis and begin working on it. So the first thing we need to do is we need to remove the knobs from the front of the unit. The center volume knob was missing, but I have some replacements for that, so you'll just have to imagine that I pulled that off. This just slides onto the shaft here, so it's not a big deal. Once you take the center knob off, then you can pull off the outer tone control knob, which just pushes onto the shaft on the outside of the volume control knob. And we're going to take these for now and put them in one of the little cups so we don't lose things. And then we need to take off the tuning knobs. Now the tuning knobs have set screws; they're not just pushed on. So if you have to rotate them so the hole is visible on the top of the knob where the set screw is, and then you use a small flat screwdriver. This is a 2mm, and you just line it up and loosen the screw, and it comes right off. So there's one. And here's the second one. And that comes off. And those we'll put aside. We'll be cleaning these knobs later on, but for today we're just going to put them in the cup. Now let's go ahead and turn it around because we need to take the chassis out of the faceplate itself. So the chassis is held into the back of the faceplate. There are 4 1/4 inch screws. There's one in each corner, and the easiest way to do this is to use a 1/4 inch nut driver. So let me go ahead and take the first 2 out. And the nut driver works really well because it reaches down inside. There are slots in the heads of the screws also, so if you don't have a nut driver, you can do it with a flat screwdriver. The screws are actually, I think they're aluminum screws, maybe. Let's see if they're magnetic or not. Yes, they are. So this is a handy little thing to have on your workbench. This is a screwdriver magnetizer and demagnetizer, and what you can do it with a nut driver. You can do it with any kind of tool that has a metal tool on it, and you draw it through the magnetizing side like this, and it will magnetize the metal in the tool, and it makes it easy to pick up things like screws. I didn't do it that much, but there you can see it dangle. So it's a handy thing to have on your workbench to magnetize your screwdrivers and things. Let's go ahead and take these 2 out. Here's the third one up here. You can see in the shadow right there. And we'll go ahead and take that one out. And we'll lift that one out. And now we have to turn the set back around to find the fourth one. The fourth one is down inside the chassis right here. So this is the big transformer right here, and this is a small transformer right here, and then it's down inside here where it's a little hard to find if you don't know where to look. We'll go ahead and take that one out. And even if it falls off your magnetized nut driver, it'll be okay because when we turn it over, it'll flip out. And once we have the 4 screws out, all you have to do is lift the chassis carefully out of the faceplate. We'll put it over here for a second. So the faceplate on a 2057 is made out of aluminum, and it has formed and folded corners, and it has these ventilation grills on the top and the bottom. And you have to be really careful with this. The aluminum is not particularly heavy. It's heavy enough for what it's doing, but you want to put this aside someplace safe so it doesn't get damaged or scratched, or if it falls off the workbench, odds are you're going to dent a corner or something, and we really don't want that to happen. So let's go ahead and put this aside, and then we'll take a look at the chassis. So here's our chassis without the faceplate in place, and we have our row of room control switches here. We have a couple dial lamps here, little light bulbs that light up the radio dial. We have this plastic radio dial cover here. We have our intercom and selector switches here, volume control, and our oval speaker cone. The first thing we want to do is we want to take away as much as we can so things don't get damaged, and also we need to remove this section so we can get to the back of the circuit board. So the first thing I'm going to do is take the light bulbs out, because we don't want to break them, and also they don't work any longer, so we're going to replace them with new ones. And we'll put all of these miscellaneous pieces in our little tin cup so we don't lose them, because we're going to need the screws and things later on. So the bulbs come out, go in the cup, and now let's take the radio dial cover off. It's held in place with just some Phillips head screws. So we'll do that. Again, all the parts you take off need to go in the cup, and then at the end of this session I'll put them in a plastic bag, and they'll go in the work tub with all the other parts and all of the bits and pieces for this particular repair so they don't get lost. And then this lifts away. You can see how dirty they get over time, and that's fine. This will get washed at the end. The printing for the radio scales is on the back of the plastic, so when we wash this, all I'm going to do is use a little warm water and some soap on the outside to get sort of the grime off of it. On the inside, we're not going to do anything much more with it than wipe it dry with a towel, because we don't want to damage the markings on the radio scales, because then what are you going to do? There's no real good way to fix that. So we'll put that aside for now. And then we need to take this black metal plate off. So to do that, we have to take the pointers off, and these just fit onto the tuning shafts. So you grab them carefully and slide them off. You want to be careful because these are probably some kind of acrylic plastic, and it does tend to get brittle, and you don't want to crack them. Also, you don't want to bend the pointers. You don't want to get a kink in it, because you'll never get it straightened out properly, and then it will always look bad. So that goes in the cup, and this one is really kind of stuck on. So let me get something and I'll show you how to deal with a stuck-on one or a stuck-on knob. Okay, so what we're looking at is the AM tuning dial, and the pointer and the clear acrylic ring that goes over the tuning shaft. It's kind of stuck in place and I can't get it off. So I'm going to show you how to do this. So first we're going to put the pointer up at 12 o'clock to get it up out of the way. Now you might think that you could just grab this with a pair of pliers like this and wiggle and pull and pry, but odds are if you do that, you're going to crack the acrylic part and ruin it. And then what are you going to do? Because where are you going to get a replacement for it? And yeah, I suppose you could probably glue it back together, but then it probably won't fit right, and why break it in the first place? So this is a tried and true method of removing something that's stuck like this, or also for knobs that are stuck on volume shafts and things like that. We're going to get two little pieces of cardboard, and we're going to put one on each side like that. And the cardboard is really to protect the plastic or the black metal plate, because we don't want to scratch it, because it shows through the radio dial and we don't want it to look bad. And then what you need is a pair of spoons. Spoons, see, 2 spoons. Okay, like the kind you eat your Cheerios with. And they need to be heavy enough that they won't bend, because we're going to abuse the spoons by using them to pry. And what you do is, okay, so you put one spoon on one side under the lip a little bit, and the other spoon on the other side under the lip a little bit, and they're resting, see, like that. How's that? And they're resting up against the top of the cardboard, so when I pry, we won't scratch the metal plate. And what we're doing here is we're making two levers, and that's one of your basic tools if you remember that from elementary school. And if you pry up, you push down on the handle of each spoon, it will usually move it up like that. And usually once you get it mostly loose, you can do the rest with your hands. Sometimes on the end, it's a little hard to get off the last little bit because when you tighten the set screw down, it bites into the brass shaft of the tuning shaft and it makes a little rough spot. It sort of deforms it a little bit, and sometimes the plastic doesn't want to slide over that too well. If yours is really bad, before you slide the pointer up, you can take a little piece of sandpaper and sand down the rough spot, and then it'll slide up easier. But by using the spoons, you're prying up at 2 points equally on either side, so you're not stressing it, and it'll slide right up and come off. How's that? That's your top tip for the day, I guess. Alright, so with the pointers off, now we can lift the metal plate off, and behind it we can see the back side of the circuit board. So I'm going to go ahead and put the metal plate and the radio tuning dial, I'm going to put those over in the container. Keep them out of the way. And now the next thing we want to do is I want to take the speaker cone off and take it out of the chassis. This is an unusual size and shape of speaker cone, and the paper on these sometimes can be very fragile, and we're going to be manipulating this and leaning it and turning it over and laying it down and all these other kind of things, and we certainly don't want to tear the paper cone. This one's rather dirty, and we'll take care of that towards the end. But for right now, what we're going to do is we're going to take this out. So the first thing we have to do is unclip the wires on the back, and fortunately in these days they have little slip-on connectors that attach to the speaker terminals, and you'll notice here that one is black and one is red, and we want to remember which way they go because it is moderately important. So what I do is I'll take a red felt pen, see if I can show you, and I mark one of the terminals with a red dot. Now on a lot of NuTone systems, if you look on the speaker cone terminals, there will be a red dot, and the red dot is always the positive terminal of the speaker cone. So we just unplug those. There's a instructional sheet, we'll get that out of the way, and then we'll turn this over and we'll take the 4 screws out that hold the speaker cone to the chassis. And again, if you've watched any of my other videos or been paying attention on this video, once you get the screws out, you're going to need these again later on. They go in the metal cup, and then we can lift this out. Now, what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to cut a piece of cardboard and put it over the front of it, and then put some tape around it to tape the cardboard over the front of the speaker cone, and then put it in a box so it's safe and out of the way. That's by far one of the very best ways to protect the cone, the paper of a speaker cone, while it's being stored or whatever, because otherwise odds are something will fall, or it'll fall off the workbench and get torn, and finding a replacement one of these, not so easy. Okay, so now that we have our speaker cone taken out, the next thing we need to do is some disassembly so we can remove the circuit board from the chassis. And the reason we have to do that is this is one of the models that a lot of the solder side of the circuit board is not accessible while it's in the chassis. There's this area down in here that's inside the chassis, and over in here and up in the top, and you really can't get to all the points you need to desolder to change out components and to work on it while the circuit board is in the chassis. So fortunately, NuTone had a clever way to assemble this particular model, and taking the circuit board out, it's not super easy, but it's not terribly difficult either. There's just a lot of details that you have to do to take it apart, and that's what we're going to do now. Okay, so on the back side of the unit, the goal here is we have to disconnect many things that tie the circuit board into the chassis. And there's a lot of wiring that we have to disconnect. There's some brackets that are in the way, and we need to be able to separate the circuit board from the chassis completely. So the first thing we're going to do that is we're going to get rid of this cardboard shield right here, because it's kind of in the way and it makes it hard to work on. And to do that, it's not too hard because it's held on with these little metal clips, which we'll save, and up two big ones up here at the top. And we don't need to take the clips off for the top ones so much as just sort of shimmy the cardboard out of them. And then the other thing we have to do is disconnect the red and black wires from the intercom volume adjustment pot, because it's permanently attached to the cardboard and we don't want to do that. So it's not really good practice to cut the wires, which is what a lot of people would want it to do. So what I did was I made a red dot next to the terminal that has the red wire. We have red and black wires. So what we're going to do is I've got my desoldering tool, and I'm going to very simply use it to melt and suck up the solder. So I can actually see the wires, and then unwrap the wires from around the tabs. Like that. Now we can take the cardboard away and put that in the repair tub so we don't lose it. So now that's loose. Down here we have the external audio input jack, and that has two wires that are soldered to it also, and we can't remove the jack from the chassis because it's riveted in place, so we have to desolder the wires on the terminals of the jack, and we're going to do that the same way. And in this case, the one wire is black and the other wire is gray, and I know where they go. But if you're doing this for the first time, and the only time probably, you'll want to make a drawing or a diagram of where the wires go so you'll remember, or alternately you can take a picture with your smartphone, and that way you can refer back to where the wires went. So there's the gray wire is loose and the black wire. So now you might think that's a lot of work, but actually that was the easy part of what we have to do. The next part is we have to remove all of the little wires that connect all of the external parts, the transformers and the volume control and the terminal strip and all these other things that are connected to the terminal board, so we can lift the terminal board out. And this will be an important part. So the first thing we're going to do is we have a wire tie right here. We're going to untwist the wire tie and to gain a little slack in the wires. There's also a fold over wire holder here, which we're going to unfold to gain a little more slack in the wires. There's also this metal bar that goes across the two tuning condensers, and while it's not absolutely necessary to remove it, you could snake the wires underneath it if you wanted to. I prefer to take it off because the more access you can gain, the better this will be to do. You absolutely have to put this back on at the end. So again, the screws go in the cup, the bracket goes there. It helps hold the tuning condensers firmly so they don't vibrate or move around, which would affect the tuning of the set. That's gotten most of the hardware out of the way. Now we have to deal with all the little wires. So the little wires that I'm talking about are a lot like this one, this white wire. And I'm going to use this as my example because I can't possibly show you how I disconnect every single wire that there is, but this will be the example and should give you an idea of what you have to do. So we have this heavier white wire here, and it has sort of a little black cover on the end of it, and this wire is not soldered to the circuit board. It actually has a slip-on connector. And if I take my little needle nose pliers and I carefully, without squeezing too much, grab the black part of the covering at the end of the wire and pry up on it, it unplugs from the little pin that's on the board right here. Let me move this out of the way so you can see better. So here's a little pin right here, and if I hold up the end of the white wire like this maybe, you can see there's a hollow tube on the end. That's the socket. So this fits down over the pin and it pushes down and sort of snaps in place. And that's what connects the wire to the circuit board. There's probably 20 or 22 wires like that around on the circuit board, and we have to unplug them all so we can remove the circuit board from the chassis. Now, here's the tricky part. You have to know unplugging them is easy. Anybody can do that. The trick is later on you have to plug them back in, and you have to plug them back in to the right spots, because if you get it wrong when you turn it on, there'll be smoke and flames and running and screaming because you'll have plugged things in the wrong places, and you'll have shorts or overloads or other things, and you're going to burn something up and ruin the set. So you have to do it carefully, and you have to mark where they go, and now I'm going to show you how to do it. So the first thing I'm going to show you again is, if we take the white wire back off, and you have to be careful. This is an important part to do. You have to do it properly, but also you have to remember this set was made in 1962. So everything in it and on it is really old. And if you're rough and you pry and you twist and you grab and you jerk on things, you're going to break something. You could break the little hollow connector on the ends of the wire. You can break the little pin off the board, or you can loosen it, then you have to resolder it. I suppose if you were really rough on things, you could break the circuit board, and then you've got a real problem. So you have to do things carefully. If you look on the circuit board, just above the pin right here, it says P1. And every pin on the board that has a wire plugged into it has a marking. We have P1 here. If I look further up, there's another one that's P20, and then there's P21, and over here where you can't see but I can, I've got P27, and there's a P1, and so on. So they're all labeled and they're all marked, and what we have to do is mark the wires as we take them off and make a list as to where the wires go back so you'll remember. Because I can tell you from experience, if you don't mark them, I don't care how many pictures you make, you will not remember where they all go. And figuring it out afterwards is a real chore. So let me show you how we mark them and how we make the list. So this is a pad of Ideal wire marker labels, and you can buy this at your home improvement store. And all it is are pages and pages and pages of self-stick pre-numbered labels. And if we peel this off, here's number 1. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the marker for number 1, and we're going to put it on the very end of the wire, and we're going to very carefully wrap it around the wire, and we're going to do it neatly. And the reason we're going to do it neatly is because we're not going to take these off when we're done. When the repair is all done, the numbers for the most part stay on the wire, because if you do it neatly like that, nobody cares. It's on the back of the unit, the wire is identified, and it doesn't really make any difference. And then what we need to do is we're going to take our tablet and we're going to write down here, one column are numbers and the other are pins, and number 1 goes to pin P1. And I'm going to go through, and every single wire that I disconnect is going to get its own individual number, and I'm going to make a ledger here of which numbers go on what pins, so later on when it's time to put all this back together I can refer to this and I'll see where everything goes. The other thing that you want to try to do is don't unbend and move all the wires around any more than you have to, because they're sort of naturally in the locations where they need to go. This white wire, it's been bent and folded over here since 1962, and that's kind of how it wants to stay. So why straighten it all out and twist it and make them all go every which way? Because when you put it back together, it should look like this. You want to just do it as carefully as you can, so at the end when they're all disconnected we can unscrew the circuit board and lift it out of the chassis. Now I'm not going to show you every single one I'm going to do because there's too many of them and I need to really concentrate and do it properly. So once I get it done, I'll be back. Okay, I'm back. A few minutes have passed and you can see, I think, that I have all of my wires disconnected, and if you look carefully there are wire number markers on every single one. And I double checked and I'm pretty sure I've got them all disconnected. And I made my list of which numbers on the wires go to which pins. So this is important. Don't lose this. If you do, you're going to be in trouble. And now the next thing we have to do, we're close to being able to take the circuit board out of the chassis, but we have to do something with the volume control and on-off switch, because it has these black wires that go across to the transformer, and that's going to be in the way because they're not tall enough to get the circuit board out of the unit without it all being in the way. So we need to unfasten that so we can sort of lift it out of the way, and then we can lift the chassis, the circuit board out of the chassis. So that's the next step. This is actually one of the easiest things you get to do. So you use a pair of pliers, because that's the best thing, and you simply loosen the nut, and if you're lucky it's not frozen on, and you just unscrew it and set it off to the side. It has this big lock washer on it also. And now the volume control is loose. So while we have it turned up on the face, let's go ahead and do one other thing in preparation of taking the circuit board out of the chassis. There are two metal straps. There's one here and there's another one like it under here, which you really can't see very well, and they hold the tuning condensers. There's 3 screws here, 1, 2, 3, and they go through the strap on these two into the tuning condenser, and then this one and the same thing on this side, and that's what holds the tuning condensers to the circuit board. So what we need to do is, to be able to take the circuit board out of the chassis, we have to unscrew the bracket. So there are 4 screws. There's one at the end of each bracket, and all we have to do is unscrew the screws. And again, don't lose the screws because you're going to need them later on. Those 3 came out really well. This one up here, it's being a little stubborn. Okay, and that one's out. So now that should take care of everything on the front. So let's go ahead and flip it over back on the back again. And since we unfastened our volume control on-off assembly, we should be able to lift it up out of the way enough, I think. There seems to be a sneaky wire underneath. So we'll leave that sort of off to the side for right now because I'm not sure where the sneaky wire is going. It's actually a resistor and it's under the board, so we'll have to look and see where that's... I think that's soldered onto one of the selector on the selector switch. So we'll leave that for now. The goal of defastening the volume control was to get the slack in the wire so we can take the board out. So the next thing we have to do is there's a little clamp on the bottom of the chassis that we have to take out, and then I think the board will lift out. So under here there's a metal strap and there's 3 screws, and if we take the screws out, we can take the strap off, and this is kind of what holds the board in place. You can see what a complex design this is, which you see more complexity in the designs of these early sets. The older they are, the more complex they are, and I think through experience they figured out better and faster ways to build these and build other models. So there's our metal strap and our 3 screws, and that'll go in our hardware cup. And now, if I'm not mistaken, we can carefully move the wires out of the way, and we should be able to lift the circuit board up and out of the chassis, being careful not to bend anything more than we have to or break anything. And there we go. How about that? That's pretty good. So our circuit board is out of the chassis, and for right now we're just going to take the chassis and set it aside in the work tub because we don't need this right now. We're going to do a little bit on this later on, but for today we're not going to worry about it. And here's our 2057-2058 circuit board out of the chassis, and you can see it's not really that big of a board, but when you get all the tubes and everything off of it, there's still components left on it, but you can get to the back side. The other thing we have to do is we have to remove these metal straps because we need to, if we need to get desolder from underneath them, they're going to be in the way. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the screws out of each one and move the strap out of the way, and then I'm going to put the screws back because the screws hold the tuning condensers to the board, and we don't want them flopping around with only one screw in them. And just to be sure of where they go, even though I think these are right and left, so I'm just going to put an R on it, and I'm going to do it in pencil because back in the day it seems that on manufactured electronics, if they were going to mark something as a notation or a production mark or something like that, they almost always used pencil. And we might as well keep with the tradition and do it the way they would have done it back in the day. So we'll put an L on this one for left so we remember where they go. Put those over there with all our hardware. And now we have a circuit board that we can have access to the whole thing. And actually, if we look right here, it actually says NuTone on the board in the copper. So you know it's a real NuTone board because it says NuTone right there. And this was probably quite a thing in 1963. And there you go. So now this is the end of part 2. Part 3 will be a little bit of work on the chassis, and then part 4 we'll get to working on the main board and see if we can get this all rebuilt and get it back together for the customer so he can have it back. So that's all for today. I hope you found part 2 to be interesting and perhaps helpful. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up on YouTube because that always helps. There'll be a banner right here that shows you how to subscribe. You can click on the wheel or the bell on our YouTube homepage, put in your email address, and you'll get notifications when we post new videos. That's all for today. See you on part 3.